Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 128, Slow Working. Slow working is a phrase that I use to describe a writing project that I just work on whenever I feel like it. So, when I'm thinking of engaging in the practice of slow working, I usually use this practice with something like conference slides. I tend to not be somebody that writes a conference presentation on a plane, so I don't do that where I'm just randomly trying to get something together at that point. I also, though, am not somebody that frets about a conference presentation or slides or something like that, 5 weeks before. But what I will do is generally a month to 3 weeks before a conference happens, I start engaging in the process of what I call slow working to think through these slides. And so, what I might do is maybe one day for 20 minutes, I'll just think about, well, what are some things that have to go in these slides? And I'll make a couple slides with those things. Then maybe 2 days later, I'll start thinking about, "Oh, well, I know I wanna put these images in there," and I'll drop a few images on the slides. Maybe the next morning, I spend 2 hours because I have a really good idea of the direction I wanna go, and I spend some time maybe doing an outline on some of the slides or actually working on a few of the things that are in there. Or if this is the case of an actual spoken talk where maybe I don't have a whole lot of words on the slides themselves, I might have some images, but I have some prepared remarks that go along with it. I'm thinking through what I want to say in specific sections and so on. And what has happened for me with conference presentations and things like that, that I can jump in and out of as writing projects, these tend to be the best types of projects that are great for what I call slow working, where I try to just work on them whenever I feel like it. There's no pressure, there's no hurry. And I find that I actually can get a fair bit done because my brain is not trying to remember a lot of nuance. So this isn't going to work for a slow working isn't going to work for something that is very heavily detailed where you need to really remember where you were working last time and what you were talking about. The nice thing with slides, and I would argue also other types of projects that are more multimodal, is that sometimes you can jump in and out wherever you feel like working. So one thing that is great for working slowly over the course of several days is that my brain is sort of working in the background and thinking through, oh, well, maybe I could actually add an image of books like the ones behind me if you're watching our YouTube channel. Or I might think through, I don't really want to talk about that particular example. Let me use this other one instead. And because it's just ongoing, it's no pressure. I find it's fairly easy to create the type of presentation that I need where I just don't feel like I'm spending time working on that and I'm using more of my intense working hours to work on a scholarly article or a book chapter or something that just requires a little bit more of my attention. That said, I can slow work on writing pieces if I'm not in a big hurry to get them complete. So, for example, I knew that I wanted to write, this was quite a while ago, but I knew I wanted to submit an article for the Center for Hellenic Studies, has a journal, Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies has a journal called Classics At, and they had a special issue for proposals on multimodality in classics. And so there was a pretty long lead on this one. It was maybe 9 months for when you had to submit a draft or something for submission. I can't remember how it exactly worked out, but that is definitely a writing project that I just worked on in bits and pieces for quite a while. So I looked for some examples. I do teach classical rhetoric as part of our graduate program at my institution. So I had some examples and I just basically made a Google folder and just started putting things in there. I put some articles I wanted to read in there. I put some images that I knew would go in this piece because this was it's for a digital journal. I can actually link to that piece so people can see it. But I know for that one, I was able to just kind of write as I saw fit. So there were some days where I spent, okay, I'm going to spend 2 hours on this piece and then not do anything with it for 3 more weeks and then come back to it. And I talked a little bit in the previous episode about slow working on some slides that were due for an upcoming deadline. Sometimes I'll just designate a project as a slow working project, just meaning that when I have time, I will work on it a little bit. It might mean that I'm going to keep it top of mind. I might leave it as an open tab, for example, on my desktop when I have my browser open. I actually wrote about this practice a little bit from interviewing somebody named Danielle DeVoss, who is a professor in the writing studies community where I work, and she talked about it as sort of toggling in and out of writing projects. In this case, I will toggle in and out of that one. I just leave the tab open because I mentioned I had a Google folder. I will just kind of leave it up there in the corner and just get to it when I see fit. Now, as the deadline gets closer, I should note I always put a calendar reminder 2 weeks ahead before a conference is coming or due, or when I'm going to need the things. So if it's, a deadline to submit, a piece to a journal or a special issue or something like that, I will have that deadline in there. So I know that at some point I'm not going to be able to slow work anymore. I'm going to have to hustle. So I should make a podcast episode called Hustle Work maybe. But, I do find it refreshing though, to just have some of these writing projects where you just do them when you feel like it. You don't feel like it, you don't have to do it. Because a lot of the things that we do with writing, we either have to do them because it's something like a revise and resubmit. And if you don't do it, you're not going to close that loop and get that publication or get, whatever the thing is. Or we owe somebody else, maybe we have an obligation project that we owe, a co-author that we promised we'd do or something like that. You can certainly wiggle out of some obligations, but not all of them. And what I find really refreshing about just designating a project as a slow working project is that it's just by association, it's going to be slow. And just this is sort of ironic, but sometimes I actually finish those presentations or whatever the slow working project is sooner than I have to do it. So I mentioned I put that 2 week calendar reminder in ahead. I noticed that sometimes I'm done by, or I'm finished by 3 weeks before. So there is a nice benefit to just sort of taking the pressure off of writing for certain projects. And conference presentations, well, maybe not what we think of academic writing per se, if we're doing more like slides and some bullet points or something like that. They still require the scholarship and the professional things that have to be in there. So I like to think of them as a project that maybe, when you want to shift attention from working on something that's really difficult, maybe your brain needs a break, but you still got to get some things done. Sometimes those slow working projects are just nice dips in and out from an intense writing process. One last thing I want to say about this too is that some people will designate certain times of day or times of year for slow working projects that they just kind of work on when they feel like it. I just talked to a faculty member about this who uses summers for very slow types of projects that they just ease in and ease out of writing whenever they see fit. In this case, this was somebody that was working on an article, and the idea was that they were going to kind of slow work through May, June, July, but if it's not where it needs to be, then August 1st, they're going to start hustling again. So that might be another way to think about it. Also, you could designate certain times of the week to be slow working. So for a long time, I don't do this now because I've kind of gotten used to toggling in and out of working on these things. But for a long time, I would always designate those projects as Friday afternoon projects, where I still wanted to get a little bit of writing completed before the weekend, but nothing really intense or nothing that was going to, make me, work super late or something longer than maybe I wanted to. So I encourage you to think if there's anything that you could be doing as a slow working project, or if you have something upcoming that maybe you could start just a little bit of it now and have a regular practice of returning to it. Maybe a Tuesday morning reminder, or something where you leave it up as a tab in your browser and you're able to see that you have to do it, or some other form of just kind of reminding you that it's there. You don't want to slow work so much that you slowly forget that you're actually doing it. But something that that you're going to return attention to it, but it's just a very low pressure project. So hopefully this helps, and happy writing this week.